Welcome to the 7th installment in this reading of Madame Bovary. Part 2, Chapter 9. 6 weeks passed. Rodolphe did not come again. At last, one evening, he appeared. The day after the show, he had said to himself, "Oh, we mustn't go back too soon. That would be a mistake." And at the end of a week, he had gone off hunting. After the hunting, he had thought it was too late, and then he reasoned thus. If from the first day she loved me, she must, from impatience to see me again, love me more. Let's go on with it. And he knew that his calculation had been right when, on entering the room, he saw Emma turn pale. She was alone. The day was drawing in. The small muslin curtain along the windows deepened the twilight, and the gilding of the barometer, on which the rays of the sun fell, shone in the looking-glass between the meshes of the corral. Rodolphe remained standing, and Emma hardly answered his first conventional phrases. "I," he said, "have been busy. I've been ill." "Seriously?" she cried. "Well," said Rodolphe, sitting down at her side on a footstool, "no, it was because I did not want to come back." "Why? Can you not guess?" He looked at her again, but so hard that she lowered her head, blushing. He went on. "Emma." "Sir," she said, drawing back a little. "Ah, you see," replied he in a melancholy voice, "that I was right not to come back. For this name that fills my whole soul, and that escaped me, you forbid me to use. Madame Bovary, why, all the world calls you thus. Besides, it is not your name, it is the name of another." He repeated, "Of another." And he hid his face in his hands. "Yes, I think of you constantly. The memory of you drives me to despair. Ah, forgive me, I will leave you. Farewell. I will go far away, so far that you will never hear of me again. And yet, today, I know not what force impelled me towards you, for one does not struggle against heaven. One cannot resist a smile of angels. One is carried away by that which is beautiful, charming, adorable." It was the first time that Emma had heard such words spoken to herself, and her pride, like one who reposes bathed in warmth, expanded softly and fully at this glowing language. "But if I did not come," he continued, "if I could not see you, at least I have gazed long on all that surrounds you. At night, every night, I arose. I came hither. I watched your house, its glimmering in the moon, the trees in the garden swaying before your window, and the little lamp, a gleam shining through the window panes in the darkness. Ah, you never knew that there, so near you, so far from you, was a poor wretch." She turned towards him with a sob. "Oh, you are good," she said. "No, I love you, that is all. You do not doubt that. Tell me one word, only one word." And Rodolphe imperceptibly glided from the footstool to the ground. But the sound of wooden shoes was heard in the kitchen, and he noticed the door of the room was not closed. "How kind it would be of you," he went on, rising, if you would humor a whim of mine. It was to go over her house. He wanted to know it, and Madame Bovary, seeing no objection to this, they both rose when Charles came in. Good morning, doctor, Rodolphe said to him. The doctor, flattered at this unexpected title, launched out into obsequious phrases. Of this the other took advantage to pull himself together a little. Madame was speaking to me, he then said, about her health. Charles interrupted him. He had indeed 1,000 anxieties. His wife's palpitations of the heart were beginning again. Then Rodolphe asked if riding would not be good. Certainly. Excellent. Just the thing. There's an idea. You ought to follow it up. And as she objected that she had no horse, Monsieur Rodolphe offered one. She refused his offer. He did not insist. Then, to explain his visit, he said that his ploughman, the man of the bloodletting, still suffered from giddiness. Oh, I'll call around, said Bovary. Oh, no. I sent him to you. We'll come. That will be more convenient for you. Oh, very good. I thank you. And as soon as they were alone, why don't you accept Monsieur Boulanger's kind offer? She assumed a sulky air, invented 1,000 excuses, and finally declared that perhaps it would look odd. Well, what the deuce do I care for that? Said Charles, making a pirouette. Health before everything. You are wrong. And how do you think I can ride when I haven't got a habit? You must order one, he answered. The riding habit decided her. When the habit was ready, Charles wrote to Monsieur Boulanger that his wife was at his command, and that they counted on his good nature. The next day at noon, Rodolphe appeared at Charles's door with 2 saddle horses. One had pink rosettes at his ears, and a deerskin side saddle. Rodolphe had put on his soft boots, saying to himself that no doubt she had never seen anything like them. In fact, Emma was charmed with his appearance as he stood on the landing in his great velvet coat and white corduroy breeches. She was ready. She was waiting for him. Justin escaped from the chemist's to see her start, and the chemist also came out. He was giving Monsieur Boulanger a little good advice. Oh, an accident happens so easily. Be careful. Your horses, perhaps, are meddlesome. She heard a noise above her. It was Félicité drumming on the window panes to amuse little Berthe. The child blew her a kiss. Her mother answered with a wave of her whip. A pleasant ride, cried Monsieur Homais. Prudence, above all prudence. And he flourished his newspaper as he saw them disappear. As soon as he felt the ground, Emma's horse set off at a gallop. Rodolphe galloped by her side. Now and then they exchanged a word. Her figure slightly bent, her hand well up, and her right arm stretched out. She gave herself up to the cadence of the movement that rocked her in her saddle. At the bottom of the hill, Rodolphe gave his horse its head. They started together at a bound, and then at the top suddenly the horse stopped, and a large blue veil fell about her. It was early in October. There was fog over the land. Hazy clouds hovered the horizon between the outlines of the hills. Others, rent asunder, floated up and disappeared. Sometimes, through a rift in the clouds, beneath a ray of sunshine, gleamed from afar the roots of Yonville, with the gardens at the water's edge, the yards, the walls, and the church steeple. Emma half closed her eyes to pick out her house, and never had this poor village where she lived appeared so small. From the height of which they were, the whole valley seemed an immense pale lake sending off its vapor into the air. Clumps of trees here and there stood out like black rocks, and the tall lines of the poplars that rose above the mist were like a beach stirred by the wind. By the side, on the turf between the pines, a brown light shimmered in the warm atmosphere. The earth, ruddy like the powder of tobacco, deadened the noise of their steps. And with the edge of their shoes, the horses, as they walked, kicked the fallen fir cones in front of them. Rodolphe and Emma thus went along the skirt of the wood. She turned away from time to time to avoid his look, and then she saw only the pine trunks in lines, whose monotonous succession made her a little giddy. The horses were panting, the leather of the saddles creaked. Just as they were entering the forest, the sun shone out. "Ah, God protects us," said Rodolphe. "Do you think so?" she said. "Forward, forward," he continued. He checked with his tongue. The two beasts set off at a trot. The long ferns by the roadside caught in Emma's stirrup. Rodolphe leaned forward and removed them as they rode along. At other times, to turn aside the branches, he passed close to her, and Emma felt his knee brushing against her leg. The sky was now blue, the leaves no longer stirred. There were spaces full of heather in flower, and plots of violets alternated with the confused patches of the trees that were grey, fawn, or golden-colored, according to the nature of their leaves. Often in the thicket was heard the fluttering of wings, or else the hoarse, soft cry of the ravens flying off amidst the oaks. They dismounted. Rodolphe fastened up the horses. She walked on in front on the moss between the paths, but a long habit got in the way, although she held it up by the skirt. And Rodolphe walked behind her, saw between the black cloth and the black shoe the fineness of a white stocking, that seemed to him as if it were a part of her nakedness. She stopped. "I am tired," she said. "Come, try again," he went on. "Courage." Then some 100 paces farther on she again stopped, and through her veil, that fell sideways from her man's hat over her hips, her face appeared in a bluish transparency, as if she were floating on the azure waves. "But where are we going?" He did not answer. She was breathing irregularly. Rodolphe looked around him, biting his mustache. They came to a large space where the coppice had been cut. They sat down on the trunk of a fallen tree, and Rodolphe began speaking to her of his love. He did not begin by frightening her with compliments. He was calm, serious, melancholy. Emma listened to him with bowed head, and stirred the bits of wood on the ground with the tip of her foot. But at the words, "Are not our destinies now one?" "Oh no," she replied. "You know that well. It is impossible." She rose to go. He seized her by the wrist. She stopped. Then, having gazed at him for a few moments with an amorous and humid look, she said hurriedly, "Ah, do not speak of it again. Where are the horses? Let us go back." He made a gesture of anger and annoyance. She repeated, "Where are the horses? Where are the horses?" Then, smiling a strange smile, his pupil fixed, his teeth set, he advanced with outstretched arms. She recoiled, trembling. She stammered, "Oh, you frighten me. You hurt me. Let me go." "If it must be," he went on, his face changing, and he again became respectful, caressing, timid. She gave him her arm. They went back. He said, "What was the matter with you? Why? I do not understand. You were mistaken, no doubt. In my soul you are as a Madonna on a pedestal, in a place lofty, secure, immaculate. But I need you to live. I must have your eyes, your voice, your thought. Be my friend, my sister, my angel." And he put out his arm round her waist. She feebly tried to disengage herself. He supported her thus as they walked along. But they heard the two horses browsing on the leaves. "Oh, one moment," said Rodolphe. "Do not let us go. Stay." He drew her farther onto a small pool where duckweeds made a greenness on the water. Faded water lilies lay motionless between the reeds. At the noise of their steps in the grass, frogs jumped away to hide themselves. "I am wrong. I am wrong," she said. "I am mad to listen to you." "Why, Emma, Emma?" "Oh, Rodolphe," said the young woman slowly, leaning on his shoulder. The cloth of her habit caught against the velvet of his coat. She threw back her white neck, swelling with a sigh, and faltering in tears. With a long shudder and hiding her face, she gave herself up to him. The shades of night were falling. The horizontal sun passing between the branches dazzled the eyes. Here and there around her, in the leaves or on the ground, trembled luminous patches, as if hummingbirds flying about had scattered the feathers. Silence was everywhere. Something sweet seemed to come forth from the trees. She felt her heart, whose beating had begun again, and the blood coursing through her flesh like a stream of milk. Then, far away, beyond the wood, on the other hills, she heard a vague, prolonged cry, a voice which lingered, and in silence she heard it mingling like music with the last pulsations of her throbbing nerves. Rodolphe, a cigar between his lips, was mending with his penknife one of the two broken bridles. They returned to Yonville by the same road. On the mud they saw again the traces of the horses side by side, the same thickets, the same stones to the grass. Nothing around them seemed changed, and yet for her something had happened more stupendous than if the mountains had moved in their places. Rodolphe now and again bent forward and took her hand to kiss it. She was charming on horseback, upright, with her slender waist, her knee bent on the mane of her horse, her face somewhat flushed by the fresh air in the red of the evening. On entering Yonville, she made her horse prance in the road. People looked at her from the windows. At dinner, her husband thought she looked well, but she pretended not to hear him when he inquired about her ride, and she remained sitting there with her elbow at the side of her plate, between the two lighted candles. "Emma," he said. "What?" "Well, I spent the afternoon at Monsieur Alexander's. He has an old cob, still very fine, only a little broken-kneed, and I could be bought, I'm sure, for 100 crowns, he added. "And thinking it might please you, I have bespoken it, bought it. Have I done right? Do tell me." She nodded her head in assent. Then, a quarter of an hour later, "Are you going out tonight?" she asked. "Yes. Why?" "Oh, nothing, my dear. And as soon as she had got rid of Charles, she went and shut herself up in her room. At first she felt stunned. She saw the trees, the paths, the ditches, Rodolphe, and she again felt the pressure of his arm while the leaves rustled and the reeds whistled. But when she saw herself in the glass, she wondered at her face. Never had her eyes been so large, so black, of so profound a depth. Something subtle about her being transfigured her. She repeated, "I have a lover. A lover," delighted at the idea as if a second puberty had come to her. So at last she was to know those joys of love, that fever of happiness of which she had despaired. She was entering upon marvels where all would be passion, ecstasy, delirium. An azure infinity encompassed her. The heights of sentiment sparkled under her thought, and ordinary existence appeared only afar off, down below in the shade, through the interspaces of these heights. Then she recalled the heroines of the books that she had read, and the lyric legion of these adulterous women began to sing in her memory, with the voice of sisters that charmed her. She became herself, as it were, an actual part of these imaginings, and realized the love dream of her youth as she saw herself in this type of amorous women whom she had so envied. Besides, Emma felt a satisfaction of revenge. Had she not suffered enough? But now she triumphed, and the love so long pent up burst forth in full joyous bubblings. She tasted it without remorse, without anxiety, without trouble. The day following passed with a new sweetness. They made vows to one another. She told him of her sorrows. Rodolphe interrupted her with kisses, and she looked at him through half-closed eyes, asked him to call her again by her name, to say that he loved her. They were in the forest, as yesterday, in the shed of some wooden shoemaker. The walls were of straw, and the roof so low they had to stoop. They were seated side by side on a bed of dry leaves. From that day forth, they wrote to one another regularly every evening. Emma placed her letter at the end of the garden by the river in a fissure of the wall. Rodolphe came to fetch it and put another there that she always found fault with as too short. One morning, when Charles had gone out before daybreak, she was seized with the fancy to see Rodolphe at once. She would go quickly to La Huchette, stay there an hour, and be back again at Yonville while everyone was still asleep. This idea made her pant with desire, and she soon found herself in the middle of the field, walking with rapid steps, without looking behind her. Day was just breaking. Emma from afar recognized her lover's house. Its two dove-tailed weathercocks stood out black against the pale dawn. Beyond the farmyard there was a detached building that she thought must be the chateau. She entered. It was as if the doors at her approach had opened wide of their own accord. A large, straight staircase led up to the corridor. Emma raised the latch of a door, and suddenly at the end of the room she saw a man sleeping. It was Rodolphe. She uttered a cry. "You here? You here?" he repeated. "How did you manage to come? Ah, your dress is damp." "I love you," she answered, throwing her arms about his neck. This first piece of daring successful, Now every time Charles went out early, Emma dressed quickly and slipped on tiptoe down the steps that led to the waterside. But when the plank for the cows was taken up, she had to go by the walls alongside of the river. The bank was slippery. In order not to fall, she caught hold of the tufts of faded wallflowers. Then she went across plowed fields in which she sank, stumbling and clogging her thin shoes. Her scarf knotted around her head, flooded to the wind in the meadows. She was afraid of the oxen. She began to run. She arrived out of breath, with rosy cheeks, and breathing out from her whole person a fresh perfume of sap, of verdure, of the open air. At this hour, Rodolphe still slept. It was like a spring morning coming into his room. The yellow curtains along the window let a heavy, whitish light enter softly. Emma felt about, opening and closing her eyes, while the drops of dew hanging from her hair formed, as it were, a topaz aureole around her face. Rodolphe, laughing, drew her to him and pressed her to his breast. And she examined the apartment, opened the drawers of the tables, combed her hair with his comb, and looked at herself in his shaving glass. Often she even put between her teeth the big pipe that lay on the table by the bed, amongst lemons and pieces of sugar, near a bottle of water. It took them a good quarter of an hour to say goodbye. Then Emma cried. She would have wished never to leave Rodolphe. Something stronger than herself forced her to him, so much so that one day, seeing her come unexpectedly, he frowned as one put out. "What's the matter with you?" she said. "Are you ill? Tell me." At last he declared with a serious air that her visits were becoming imprudent, that she was compromising herself. Part 2, Chapter 10. Gradually, Rodolphe's fears took possession of her. At first, love had intoxicated her, and she had thought of nothing beyond. But now that he was indispensable to her life, she feared to lose anything of this, or even that it should be disturbed. When she came back from his house, she looked all about her, anxiously watching every form that passed in the horizon, and every village window from which she could be seen. She listened for steps, cries, the noise of the plows, and she stopped short, white and trembling more than the aspen leaves swaying overhead. One morning, as she was thus returning, she suddenly thought she saw the long barrel of a carbine that seemed to be aimed at her. It stuck out sideways from the end of a small tub, half buried in the grass on the edge of the ditch. Emma, half fainted with terror, nevertheless walked on, and a man stepped out of the tub like a jack-in-the-box. He had gaiters buckled up to the knees, his cap pulled down over his eyes, trembling lips, and a red nose. It was Captain Binet, lying in ambush for wild ducks. "You ought to have called out long ago," he exclaimed. "When one sees a gun, one should always give warning." The tax collector was thus trying to hide the fright he had had, for a prefectorial order having prohibited duck hunting except in boats. Monsieur Binet, despite his respect for the laws, was infringing them, and so he every moment expected to see the rural guard turn up. But this anxiety whetted his pleasure, and all alone in his tub, he congratulated himself on his luck and his cuteness. At sight of Emma, he seemed relieved from a great weight. and at once entered upon a conversation. "Oh, it isn't warm, it's nipping." Emma answered nothing. "And you out so early?" "Yes," she said, stammering. "I'm just coming from the nurse where my child is." "Ah, very good, very good. For myself, I am here just as you see me, since break of day. But the weather is so muggy that unless one had the bird at the mouth of the gun—" "Good evening, Monsieur Binet," she interrupted him, turning on her heel. "Your servant, madame," he replied dryly, and he went back into his tub. Emma regretted having left the tax collector so abruptly. No doubt he would form unfavorable conjectures. The story about the nurse was the worst possible excuse. Everyone at Yonville knowing that the little Bovary had been at home with her parents for a year. Besides, no one was living in this direction. This path led only to La Huchette. Binet then would guess whence she came, and he would not keep silence. He would talk, that was certain. She remained until the evening, racking her brain with every conceivable lying project, and had constantly before her eyes that imbecile with the game bag. Charles, after dinner, seeing her gloomy, proposed by way of distraction to take her to the chemist's, and the first person she caught sight of in the shop was the tax collector again. He was standing in front of the counter, lit up by the gleams of the red bottle, and was saying, "Please give me half an ounce of vitriol." "Justin," cried the druggist, "bring us the sulphuric acid." Then to Emma, who was going up to Madame Homais' room, "No, stay here. It isn't worthwhile going up. She is just coming down. Warm yourself at the stove in the meantime. Excuse me. Good day, doctor." For the chemist much enjoyed pronouncing the word doctor, as if addressing another by it reflected on himself some of the grandeur that he found in it. "Now take care not to upset the mortars. You better fetch some chairs from the little room. You know very well that the armchairs are not to be taken out of the drawing room." And to put his armchair back in its place, he was darting away from the counter, when Binet asked him for half an ounce of sugar acid. "Sugar acid," said the chemist contemptuously. "Don't know it. I'm ignorant of it. But perhaps you want oxalic acid. It is oxalic acid, isn't it?" Binet explained that he wanted a corrosive to make himself some copper water with which to remove rust from his hunting things. Emma shuddered. The chemist began saying, "Indeed, the weather is not propitious on account of the damp." "Nevertheless," replied the tax collector with a sly look, "there are people who like it." She was stifling. "And give me, will he never go?" thought she. "Half an ounce of resin and turpentine, 4 ounces of yellow wax, and 3 ounces of animal charcoal, if you please, to clean the varnished leather off my togs." The druggist was beginning to cut the wax when Madame Homais appeared, Irma in her arms, Napoleon by her side, and Athalie following. She sat down on the velvet seat by the window, and the lad squatted down on a footstool, while his eldest sister hovered round the juju box near her papa. The latter was filling funnels and corking phials, sticking on labels, marking up parcels. Around him all were silent. Only from time to time were heard the weights jingling in the balance, and a few low words from the chemist giving directions to his pupils. "And how's the little woman?" suddenly asked Madame Homais. "Silence!" exclaimed her husband, who was writing down some figures in his wastebook. "Oh, why didn't you bring her?" she went on in a low voice. "Hush, hush," said Emma, pointing with her finger to the druggist. But Binet quite absorbed in looking over his bill, had probably heard nothing. At last he went out. Then Emma, relieved, uttered a deep sigh. "How hard you are breathing," said Madame Bovary. "Well, you see, it's rather warm," she replied. So the next day, they talked over how to arrange their rendezvous. Emma wanted to bribe her servant with a present, but it would be better to find some safe house at Yonville. Rodolphe promised to look for one. All through the winter, 3 or 4 times a week, in the dead of night, he came to the garden. Emma had on purpose taken away the key of the gate, which Charles thought lost. To call her, Rodolphe threw a sprinkle of sand at the shutters. She jumped up with a start, but sometimes he had to wait, for Charles had a mania for chatting by the fireside, and he would not stop. She was wild with impatience. If her eyes could have done it, she would have hurled him out at the window. At last, she would begin to undress, then take up a book and go on reading very quietly, as if the book amused her. But Charles, who was in bed, called to her to come too. "Come now, Emma," he said. "It is time." "Yes, I am coming," she answered. Then, as the candles dazzled him, he turned to the wall and fell asleep. She escaped, smiling, palpitating, undressed. Rodolphe had a large cloak. He wrapped her in it, and putting his arm around her waist, he drew her without a word to the end of the garden. It was in the arbor, on the same seat of old sticks where formerly Léon had looked at her so amorously on the summer evenings. She never thought of him now. The stars shone through the leafless jasmine branches. Behind them they heard the river flowing, and now and again on the bank the rustling of the dry reeds. Masses of shadow here and there loomed out in the darkness, and sometimes, vibrating with one movement, they rose up and swayed like immense black waves, pressing forward to engulf them. The cold of the nights made them clasp closer. The size of their lips seemed to them deeper, their eyes, that they could hardly see, larger. And in the midst of the silence, slow words were spoken that fell on their souls sonorous, crystalline, and that reverberated in multiplied vibrations. When the night was rainy, they took refuge in the consulting room between the cart shed and the stable. She lighted one of the kitchen candles that she had hidden behind the box. Rodolphe settled down there as if at home. The sight of the library, of the bureau, of the whole apartment, in fine, excited his merriment, and he could not refrain from making jokes about Charles, which rather embarrassed Emma. She would have liked to see him more serious, and even on occasion more dramatic, as for example when she thought she heard a noise of approaching steps in the alley. "Someone's coming," she said. He blew out the light. "Have you your pistols?" "Why?" "Why, to defend yourself," replied Emma. "From your husband? Oh, poor devil." And Rodolphe finished his sentence with a gesture that said, "I could crush him with a flip of my finger." She was wonder-stricken at his bravery, although she felt in it a sort of indecency and a naive coarseness that scandalized her. Rodolphe reflected a good deal on the affair of the pistols. If she had spoken seriously, it was very ridiculous, he thought, even odious. For he had no reason to hate the good Charles, not being what is called devoured by jealousy, and on this subject Emma had taken a vow that he did not think in the best of taste. Besides, she was growing very sentimental. She had insisted on exchanging miniatures. They had cut off handfuls of hair And now she was asking for a ring, a real wedding ring, in sign of an eternal union. She often spoke to him of the evening chimes, of the voices of nature. Then she talked to him of her mother, hers, and of his mother, his. Rodolphe had lost his 20 years ago. Emma nonetheless consoled him with caressing words, as one would have done a lost child, and sometimes even said to him, gazing at the moon, "I am sure that above there, together they approve of our love." But she was so pretty. He had possessed so few women of such ingenuousness. This love without debauchery was an experience for him, and, drawing him out of his lazy habits, caressed at once his pride and his sensuality. Emma's enthusiasm, which his bourgeois good sense disdained, seemed to him in his heart of hearts charming, since it was lavished on him. Then, sure of being loved, he no longer kept up appearances, and insensibly his ways changed. He had no longer, as formerly, words so gentle that they made her cry, nor passionate caresses that made her mad, so that their great love, which engrossed her life, seemed to lessen beneath her like the water of a stream absorbed into its channel, and she could see the bed of it. She would not believe it. She redoubled in tenderness, and Rodolphe concealed his indifference less and less. She did not know if she regretted having yielded to him, or whether she did not wish, on the contrary, to enjoy him the more. The humiliation of feeling herself weak was turning to rancor. Tempered by their voluptuous pleasures, it was not affection. It was like continual seduction. He subjugated her. She almost feared him. Appearances, nevertheless, were calmer than ever. Rodolphe, having succeeded in carrying out the adultery after his own fancy, and at the end of 6 months, when the springtime came, they were to one another like a married couple, tranquilly keeping up a domestic flame. It was the time of year when old Rouault sent his turkey in remembrance of the setting of his leg. The present always arrived with a letter. Emma cut the string that tied it to the basket, and read the following lines. "My dear children, I hope this will find you well, and that this one will be as good as the others, for it seems to me a little more tender, if I may venture to say so, and heavier. But next time, for a change, I'll give you a turkey cock, unless you have a preference for some dabs, and send me back the hamper, if you please, with the 2 old ones. I have had an accident with my cart sheds, whose covering flew off one windy night among the trees. The harvest has not been over good either. Finally, I don't know when I shall come to see you. It is so difficult now to leave the house since I am alone, my poor Emma." And here there was a break in the lines, as if the old fellow had dropped his pen to dream a little while. For myself, I am very well, except for a colt I caught the other day at the fair at Yvetot, where I had gone to hire a shepherd, having turned away mine because he was too dainty. How we are to be pitied with such a lot of thieves. Besides, he was also rude. I heard from a peddler who, traveling through your part of the country this winter, had a tooth drawn, that Bovary was as usual working hard. That doesn't surprise me, and he showed me his tooth. We had some coffee together. I asked him if he had seen you, and he said not, but that he had seen 2 horses in the stables, from which I concluded that business is looking up. So much the better, my dear children, and may God send you every imaginable happiness. It grieves me not yet to have seen my dear little granddaughter, Berthe Bovary. I've planted an Orleans plum tree for her in the garden under your room, and I won't have it touched unless it is to have jam made for her by and by, that I will keep in the cupboard for her when she comes. And goodbye, my dear children. I kiss you, my girl, you too, my son-in-law, and the little one on both cheeks. I am, with the best compliments, your loving father, Theodore Rouault. She held the coarse paper in her fingers for some minutes. The spelling mistakes were interwoven one with the other, and Emma followed the kindly thought that cackled right through it, like a hen half hidden in the hedge of thorns. The writing had been dried with ashes from the hearth, for a little grey powder slipped from the letter on her dress, and she almost thought she saw her father bending over the hearth to take up the tongs. How long since she had been with him, sitting on the footstool in the chimney corner, where she used to burn the end of a bit of wood in the great flame of the sea sedges. She remembered the summer evenings all full of sunshine. The colts neighed when anyone passed by, and galloped. Under her window there was a beehive, and sometimes the bees, wheeling around in the light, struck against her window like rebounding balls of gold. What happiness there had been at that time, what freedom, what hope, what an abundance of illusions. Nothing was left of them now. She had got rid of them all in her soul's life, in all her successive conditions of life, maidenhood, her marriage, and her love, thus constantly losing them all her life through, like a traveller who leaves something of his wealth at every inn along his road. But what then made her so unhappy? What was the extraordinary catastrophe that had transformed her? And she raised her head, looking around as if to seek the cause of that which made her suffer. An April ray was dancing on the china of the whatnot. The fire burned. Beneath her slippers she felt the softness of the carpet. The day was bright, the air warm, and she heard her child shouting with laughter. In fact, the little girl was just then rolling on the lawn in the midst of the grass that was being turned. She was lying flat on her stomach at the top of a rick. The servant was holding her by her skirt. Lestiboudois was raking by her side, and every time he came near she leant forward, beating the air with both her arms. "Bring her to me," said her mother, rushing to embrace her. "How I love you, my poor child, how I love you." Then, noticing that the tips of her ears were rather dirty, she rang at once for warm water and washed her, changed her linen, her stockings, her shoes, asked 1,000 questions about her health, as if on the return from a long journey, and finally, kissing her again and crying a little, she gave her back to the servant, who stood quite thunderstricken at this excess of tenderness. That evening Rodolphe found her more serious than usual, and that will pass over, he concluded. It's a whim. And he missed 3 rendezvous running. When he did come, she showed herself cold and almost contemptuous. "Ah, you're losing your time, my lady." And he pretended not to notice her melancholy sighs, nor the handkerchief she took out. Then Emma repented. She even asked herself why she detested Charles. If it had not been better to have been able to love him, but he gave her no opportunities for such a revival of sentiment, so that she was much embarrassed by her desire for sacrifice, when the druggist came just in time to provide her with an opportunity.